The following is an article in the publication Postcards from Barsoom from July 18th, 2024. The title of the article is Right-Wing Cancel Squads. The subtitle reads, On the ethical dilemma of using the left's tactics against them, and why the right shouldn't worry about becoming just as bad as the left. It was written by John Carter. The author included an image of a dark, monstrous figure standing on jagged terrain against a large, red, moonlit backdrop. The caption reads, Reza Afshar, inspired by Jin Ro, the Wolf Brigade. The left's reaction to the missed shot heard around the world has been exactly as calm and measured as we have grown to expect. Sensing that America is teetering on the edge of the abyss of civil violence, and realizing that they need to de-escalate the situation, liberals have thrown open their arms with a message of conciliation and unity, as embodied by popular slogans such as, Make aiming great again. You can really feel the love. Recently, ex-itters Libs of TikTok, nay Chaya Raichik, got a Home Depot employee fired from her job. The woman herself isn't important, just another obese, frumpy hick lib convinced that Trump is Antichrist McHitler because her opinion box on her living room wall has spent the last 8 years lying to her about Russia. The details aren't all that interesting. The woman made an ill-considered comment on Facebook to the effect that she wished the would-be assassin hadn't missed, which Raichik shared with her audience of rage-bait junkies, which led to an angry veteran confronting the woman at her place of work. The video of which Raichik also shared, which led to Home Depot canning the unpleasant sow. The result has been an immediate moral split on the right, between those who are appalled and those who applaud. The former consider it a basic civic principle that people should not lose their jobs for getting mad on the internet, no matter how objectionable or offensive their words. Isn't free speech what we've been fighting for all these years? If the right starts using the power of the cancel mob, do we not become no different from the left? The author included an image of a cartoon with 2 panels. In the first panel, a person says, But if we use the government, how will we stop people from using it against us? In the last panel, it is revealed that the speaker, along with the person he is speaking to, are all about to be summarily executed. To the other side of this debate, such qualms sound like the council of cowards eager to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Yet another example of conservatives determined to be beautiful losers. The author included an image of a historical painting depicting a battle scene between British soldiers and Zulu warriors. A quote says, Hold your fire, damn your eyes. If you kill them, you're no better than they are. We have principles, goddammit. Remember what you're not fighting for. That there are so many of us who feel queasy at the thought of getting low-level proles fired from their jobs for sounding off online is a very good thing. It speaks to the fact that, unlike the enemy, we actually have a moral center. Notably, this was never a serious debate on the left. Those few left-wing voices in the early teens who championed classical liberal principles of freedom of expression were summarily canceled themselves and are largely on our side now. In an ideal world, we would all give one another vastly greater latitude. No one would get mobbed, fired, forced to resign, kicked out of school, or ostracized from their professional networks for the non-crime of an unpopular opinion. No one would have to worry about people combing through decade-old social media posts looking for gotcha words that weren't gotchas when they were written, but became crime-speak ex post facto. In the long run, it's essential that we aim for permissive social mores regarding public and private discourse. This is a simple matter of technological context. Social media means that there is a more or less indelible record of your every public utterance. Sure, you can try to scrub it, but that won't stop screenshots. Sure, you can try to cloak yourself behind a pseudonymous identity, but that just means you need to worry about doxing. Cell phones mean that your private conversations can be recorded. We live in an electronic surveillance society now. We're all watching one another all the time, and short of a Carrington event knocking us back into the Iron Age, there's no realistic possibility of that changing. If we keep holding one another to impossible standards of public discourse, we will live in a totalitarian hell. That is, indeed, precisely the world that we have all lived in for the last decade. The only way we avoid this is by adopting a public ethos that is exceptionally forgiving. But we do not live in that world yet, and that is entirely the left's fault. Before going any further, it's worth reminding ourselves of the world we have actually lived in for the last 10 years. Here's a small sampling, something of a greatest hits reel, largely thanks to this helpful thread. The author included a screenshot of a news article titled, "Rosetta scientist Dr. Matt Taylor apologizes for offensive shirt." The subtitle reads, "Taylor breaks down during apology for sexist shirt as he delivers progress report on Comet mission." The article begins, quote, "The scientist who caused a furore by wearing a sexist shirt as he gave a progress report on the Rosetta mission on Wednesday has made an emotional apology for his big mistake." Matt Taylor was more plainly dressed on Friday as he broke down in tears at a briefing, apparently struggling to speak before confessing, "I made a big mistake, and I offended many people, and I am very sorry about this." End of quote. The author included a screenshot of a news article from April 2014 titled, "Brendan Eich Steps Down as Mozilla CEO." Here is the visible text of the article. Quote, "Mozilla prides itself on being held to a different standard, and this past week, we didn't live up to it. We know why people are hurt and angry, and they are right. It's because we haven't stayed true to ourselves. We didn't act like you'd expect Mozilla to act. We didn't move fast enough to engage with people once the controversy started. We're sorry. We must do better. Brendan Eich has chosen to step down from his role as CEO. He's made this decision for Mozilla and our community." End of quote. The author included a screenshot of a social media post from January 2019 by user Riza Aslan. It reads, "Honest question. Have you ever seen a more punchable face than this kid's?" It includes an image of a high school student at the Lincoln Memorial. The author included a screenshot of a social media post from user Jack Morrissey. It reads, "Hashtag MAGA kids go screaming, hats first, into the wood chipper." It includes an image that references the wood chipper scene in the 1996 film Fargo. The author included a screenshot of a social media post by user at Louisville Gun. It reads, "In 2021, Gina Carano cautioned people on the left to tone down the rhetoric, warning where it'd lead. What did she get? Fired." The author included a screenshot of a news article from December 2023 that reads, "Virginia Supreme Court backs fired teacher who refused to use transgender students' pronouns." The author included a screenshot of a news article from August 2018 that reads, "Connor Daly loses Lilly Diabetes sponsorship after his father's use of racial slur on air in 1980s." The author included a screenshot of a news article that reads, "Conservative influencers sentenced to 7 months in prison after sharing Clinton meme." The author included an image of a news article from September 2020 titled, "Professor is at center of controversy over Chinese word that sounded like racial slur." The subtitle reads, "A professor at the University of Southern California finds himself at the center of controversy after using a Mandarin word in class that some students said sounded like N-word." The author included an image of a news article from June 2020 titled, "SDG and E-worker fired over alleged racist gesture says he was cracking knuckles." The subtitle reads, "A Ramona man says he was fired at his job at SDG and E after a stranger posted a picture of him on Twitter and accused him of making a white power sign with his hand." The author included an image of a Toronto Star newspaper front page from August 2021. The headline reads, "If an unvaccinated person catches it from someone who is vaccinated, boo-hoo, too bad. I have no empathy left for the willfully unvaccinated. Let them die. I honestly don't care if they die from COVID, not even a little bit. Unvaccinated patients do not deserve ICU beds." End of quote. The first incident in that series, the cancellation of space scientist Dr. Matt Taylor, was my personal emotional breaking point with the left. Before that, I considered myself to be broadly aligned with the left, mainly due to disgust over the fallout of the 2008 financial crisis and disillusionment with the then ongoing, pointless, costly horror of the perpetual terror war. What happened to Matt Taylor shook me out of it. Here was a guy who had just landed a robot on a comet, reduced to a mass of blubbering jello because shrieking women didn't like the way the sexy Barbarella prints on his Hawaiian shirt objectified women, i.e., made the ugly ones feel bad. At the time, that hysterical mob included many I counted as friends. I tried reasoning with them, pointing out that his shirt had been designed by a friend of his, an independent female artist, and that by wearing the shirt at the press conference at the apex of his career, with many more millions of eyes focused upon him than had ever looked his way before, or would ever glance his way again, he was helping that friend, who is a woman herself, to expand her business. It didn't matter, of course. Caught up in the digital Maenad frenzy, there was no reasoning with them. Over the decades subsequent to Dr. Taylor's defenestration, we have seen people get canceled for refusing to use the right pronouns, for refusing to genuflect before the rainbow, for wearing red hats in public, for donating to the wrong political causes, for getting into arguments with black people, for being related to someone who used a racial slur, for voicing words in Chinese that sound like racial slurs, and on without rhyme, reason, or limiting principle. The left has been absolutely ruthless and relentless in its pursuit of total monolithic discursive purity. This is not merely an internet phenomenon, with consequences limited to those who draw the terrible gaze of the beast with a million eyes. You have almost certainly felt this in your personal life. The subtle, steady pressure to bite your tongue in every social and professional situation. The knowledge that if you say too much, if you cross one of the myriad invisible, ever-shifting red lines in the left's mutable cat's cradle of taboos, you risk total social and professional death. All the more galling has been that leftists themselves feel absolutely no shame about voicing their demented gibberish at every opportunity, no matter how professionally or socially inappropriate. Again, most of you will have experienced this. Maybe there's that Thanksgiving dinner, at which you did your best to avoid anything divisively political, only to endure sermons from your liberal aunt, who felt it her moral duty to correct her wayward relations, who are ignorant and need to educate themselves, on the urgency of climate change, or the ethical imperative of confronting whiteness wherever it may be glimpsed. Maybe you've had to grit your teeth at an office meeting, the purpose of which was ostensibly to discuss the new sales tracking software, at which Debbie from accounting inserted an egregious dig at the bad orange Russian agent under the mistaken impression that this would meet with universal approval. All it takes is one of these people to ruin a workplace for everyone. The moment one of them sees or hears anything that triggers them, no matter how innocuous, they run to HR, and your job is on the line. They are active in this, spontaneously discovering new ways to be offended, such that no one can predict what will send them off into a tantrum next. Everyone knows this, with the result that everyone is constantly walking on eggshells, aware that the walls have ears, as do the blue-haired women built like walls. For all the hand-wringing over the Home Depot lady's firing, I suspect a lot of her co-workers sighed with relief when they got the news that they would no longer have to dance around her tender sensibilities in the lunchroom. As cancel culture metastasized, it evolved, becoming more aggressive and intolerant. What started with getting mobbed for saying the wrong thing quickly turned into getting mobbed for failing to say the right thing. You were expected not only to avoid racial slurs, but to proclaim the superiority of other races and the guilty inferiority of your own. Not only to tolerate the sodomites, but to celebrate them and offer up your children to them. In academia, one was required to include diversity statements in one's job application package, the transparent purpose of which was to weed out those with the wrong politics. In science, it has become a necessity to provide detailed explanations of how one's research, for example, into the crystalline structure of fullerene molecules or the reproductive cycles of rare Amazonian moths, would advance the goals of inclusion and equity. And then, of course, there was the vax mandate, that ultimate loyalty test, in which one was expected to give the regime access to one's very DNA in order to keep one's job. This long chain of egregious abuse by the left is why, while a few express uneasiness or even disgust at the treatment of that Home Depot lady, most are fresh out sympathy. And in fact, this brief taste has awakened a ravenous hunger for more. This is not only vindictiveness, although I freely admit that there is quite a bit of that. The left have behaved like repellent vermin for a decade now. Longer, indeed, if one considers the full intergenerational sweep of the reign of political correctness. Justice demands that they suffer, and suffer horribly. There are times when one does not want to win so much as one wants them to lose. But there is also a degree of cold, strategic calculation that goes into this desire to inflict agonies upon them. If we are going to arrive at a social compromise in which we do not punish people for their speech, a reaffirmation for the sand age of the ancient Saxon right to plainly speak one's mind, it is necessary that everyone develop a keen appreciation of just how horrible the alternative is. This can only be grounded in a visceral revulsion at the very thought of cancellation, the way the world has looked at chemical weapons ever since the Great War, which in turn must come from direct, personal experience of what it feels like to be on the receiving end. To this end, distasteful as it may seem, the liberal's face must be pressed down into her own steaming pile of excrement. She must be made to taste it and gag and swallow nonetheless. She must be made to weep burning tears. She must be traumatized and made to understand that this is what she did, that these are the rules of engagement that she established, that these are the consequences of loss in this awful game that she has forced all of us to play. She needs to beg for the game to end, for the rules to change. There will be no lack of targets, no shortage of material to work with. Lulled by the protective bubble created by their teeming hive of mass psychosis, cushioned by the regime's indulgent embrace, they have for years made the most outrageous statements under their own names, and have certainly continued this pattern in the aftermath of Trump's failed assassination. At the moment, it is only possible to ruin them for their bloodthirsty mockery of the rightful president's narrow brush with death. But this must be seen as the thin end of the wedge, the weak point in the enemy's defenses. If we exploit this bridgehead, we can push further and set their dry paper of their engorged wasp's nest on fire. We want to be in a place where every leftist in the Western Hemisphere lives in a state of quiet panic, that the pictures of them holding up fists at BLM rallies, the video clips of them waving rainbows at the local public school, or the screenshots of them sounding off on social media about the irredeemable vileness of the white male, will come back to haunt them, that these records will get dredged up and thrust in front of their employers, friends, and families. We want them to laugh nervously whenever the 2010s are broached, insisting that times were obviously different back then. And please, can we change the subject? We want them to be like Germans in the aftermath of the Second World War, avoiding as much as they can the awkward question of what they and everyone else did during the 1930s. We want them, in short, to feel as we have these last 10 terrible years. Again, the goal of this is not only satisfying the emotional thirst for vengeance. The goal is strategic. It is to ensure that we never again repeat the madness of the crazy years. It is to ensure that gay race communism is crushed forever, that it is permanently seen as low status, déclassé, evidence of a small and polluted and ill-smelling and foul thing, not to be discussed in polite company. There is the risk, of course, that in using this weapon, the right will become just like the left. The Israel question, for example, could derange the right. It is not hard to imagine Reichik, an Orthodox Jew and presumably therefore a Zionist, turning on right-wing opponents of Israel, of whom there are a very large number. In general, however, it does not seem terribly plausible that the right will necessarily become just like the left simply because it adopts a tactic that the left has demonstrated the efficacy of. This is due to the very different character of rightist versus leftist political violence. The briefest survey of 20th century history demonstrates that, in terms of raw body count, there is simply no comparison between left and right. Leftist regimes have wiped out on the order of 100 million people. Rightist regimes on the order of 10 million, an order of magnitude difference. The 10 million estimate furthermore applies only if the Austrian painter's National Socialism is counted as right rather than left. A question which is hotly debated and on which I take no position here, save to observe that if the National Socialist German Workers' Party is counted as a leftist regime, the difference between left and right body counts approaches 2 orders of magnitude rather than 1. There is a very simple reason for this disparity. The leftist program is invariably some kind of insane utopianism. Society, as it has organically developed over the millennia, with all of its customs, traditions, religions, and unchosen bonds of geography, language, and genetics, is judged to be fundamentally flawed due to not matching some glittering ideal of pure theory that exists only in fevered leftist imaginations. Since these organic societies have in general evolved to account, however, irrationally, for the myriad quirks of human nature that are nowhere acknowledged within the theoretical confabulations of the leftist mind, attempts to reform society invariably run into the limitations imposed by human nature. Since their beautiful theories of social perfection must be axiomatically true, it follows that the human nature which impedes the theory must be the problem. This then places the left into opposition with a society of normal people, who are judged defective. First, it is some specific class or group that are the problem, the kulaks or the counter-revolutionary petty bourgeoisie or whatever, and these are duly persecuted and eliminated. When that doesn't solve the problem, a different group is identified. The result is always mountains of bleached skulls piled on top of an ashy wasteland, where once a functioning society stood. The left, in other words, is always, despite its claim to speak for the people, the revolt of an insane minority against the normal majority. The author included a social media post by user Mystery Grove Publishing Co. Quote, "Reminder, communism is when ugly, deformed freaks make it illegal to be normal, then rob and or kill all successful people out of petty resentment and cruelty. The ideology is all just window dressing." End of quote. By contrast, rightist violence is far more surgical. Yes, there have been horrors unleashed by the right, campaigns of terror, torture and assassination, secret prisons and death squads, and massacres and mass graves, and all the rest of it. Rightist regimes have done very bad things. But those bad things tend to be aimed, comparatively carefully, at the left. Quite specifically, where the left wages war on the majority of the population in defiance of everything true and beautiful, the right wages war on the left in defense of the majority of the population, while generally leaving the people themselves alone. Leftist violence is always an endless purity spiral, progressing into bottomless depths of the abyss. The goal they chase is illusory, a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow, which can never be reached. Rightist violence has a tangible, achievable goal: ending leftist violence, after which the storm passes. This is why I do not think the right risks becoming the left by using cancellation tactics. The left has spent the last decade demanding that normal people get down on their knees and kiss Foucault's cock ring, proclaiming their enthusiastic support of whatever insane abomination the left dreamed up the week before. It has been an extended, elaborate, tedious, demoralizing humiliation ritual, in which we have all been expected to debase both conscience and intellect by continually agreeing that up is down, black is white, night is day, bitter is sweet, sick is healthy, ugly is beautiful, decay is growth. The author included an image of a dark fantasy scene featuring various characters and creatures in an ornate, mystical setting. The image caption reads, "Ralph Horsley." The right will do none of these things, because they are not in its nature to do. Any attempt to do them will generate no enthusiasm, and therefore fail to rise to the threshold necessary for effective cancellation. No one will be cancelled for refusing to go along with obvious madness, because the right does not demand that reality be denied and madness called reality. The right will aim its volleys quite carefully at the diseased, dysgenic mutants that have put us through this hell, and that will be that. The author included an image of futuristic soldiers in armor, battling against monstrous creatures in a fiery landscape. The image caption reads, Jaime Martinez. We've been talking about a vibe shift for some time. It's very real in my experience. Boycotts against Bud Light and Target were devastatingly effective. Most recently, John Deere was liberated, deciding in the face of public disgust that it doesn't want to die after all, no matter how much ESG investment Larry Fink bribes them with. Meanwhile, Greatest Sin Month was distinctively muted this year. Liberals themselves have been notably less aggressive, at least in person. Meanwhile, there's been a hard edge of bitter resentment in the voices of normies whenever anything woke is mentioned. The bafflement and annoyance of years past, and the fear have curdled into hate. The left has made itself extremely unpopular with a very large number of people. The bullet that clipped Trump's ear was gasoline on the fire. We all feel it. The exhausted disgust with leftist tyranny that quietly permeated society abruptly crystallized into implacable resolve. Now is not the time for pity. You must treat pity as a four-letter word. Now is the time to press the attack, to make them suffer, to grab hold of that unease creeping through the enemy's hearts and squeeze it until it bursts apart into a wild, desperate panic. We can be magnanimous after victory. Indeed, we must be magnanimous after victory, for our hearts, unlike theirs, are noble. It is for this very reason that it is our values and not theirs that should rule. Where they offer no hope of redemption, only attacking harder when someone makes the mistake of apologizing, we will need to be more generous and forgiving. Yes, we will say, you did not know any better. You were deceived. You thought you were doing the right thing. You were just going along with the crowd. It's okay. You have seen the error of your ways. You have atoned. We absolve you. Go in peace, for we are now friends, and the past is the past. We will do this because it is the right thing to do, and because it is practical. But before we can be magnanimous in victory, we must be victorious. And while the momentum is on our side, we have not won yet. Now is the time to fight. The author included an image of a stylized illustration of Donald Trump with a raised fist, with the word "fight" at the bottom. Thank you for taking the time to read this. If you're new to Barsoom, you can find a selection of some of my better work here, which spans quite a range of topics: neuroscience, philosophy, metaphysics, UAPs, World War III, the fertility crisis, the D.I.E. Ying Academy. I go all over the place. There's something for everyone. If any of that sounds like something you might enjoy, you must subscribe. There is no choice. Failure to do so will mean that you miss out on the next postcard from Barsoom. Your friends will laugh at you, women will scorn you, your ancestors disown you. As always, a vast thank you to you, my patrons, my Medicis, who make it possible for me to devote myself to writing these essays for you, and all of the plebeians who enjoy these works for free. And if you count yourself among the plebs in the free seats, know that I love you too. But will love you more if you elevate yourself to patrician status and become a supporter. You may also consider spreading this on whatever anti-social media platform you fry your frontal cortex with. Oh, and there is a book coming. The author included an image of a book cover titled The Bushido of Bitcoin by Alexander Svetsky, featuring a samurai with a Bitcoin symbol on a red circle in the background. It lists virtues alongside Japanese kanji characters. Alexander Svetsky's Bushido of Bitcoin is now available for pre-order. For the past several months, I've been helping him edit it, and it's been a fascinating project to assist with. Svetsky meditates on the warrior virtues of feudal Japan, medieval Europe, and the Hellenistic Age, asking how these can be adapted to the coming Diamond Age of cyberpunk multipolarity. There's a Kickstarter, which has passed its initial goal and is now into stretch goal territory. The promo video is amazing and worth watching for its own sake. That concludes Right-Wing Cancel Squads, an article from July 18th, 2024, in the publication Postcards from Barsoom. The following is an article in the publication The Upheaval from October 9th, 2024. The title of the article is On Millennial Snot. The subtitle reads, About the distinctively obnoxious way our elites talk down to us now. It was written by Dudley Newwright. The author included an extreme close-up of comedian Adam Conover's face. Dudley Newwright is the author of the Newwright Post, a newsletter diligently cataloging and curating the latest and best and most hilarious and/or cringeworthy content, personalities, and internet drama bubbling up out of the so-called Newwright. It's fun, irreverent, refreshingly lighthearted, and actually quite useful for those like me who are not on social media but still somehow a part of this political and cultural space or otherwise interested in keeping track of it. Dudley himself is also consistently well-written and thoughtful, and I've encouraged him to try branching out into writing his own essays. So when he sent me a draft of this piece on the distinctively juvenile style of language adopted by the professional managerial class in recent decades, I was happy to publish it here as a guest post. It gets at what I think is really a very deep question. Why has all our political and cultural discourse, and especially that of our alleged governing elite, become so utterly unserious? I hope you enjoy Dudley's humorous take on answering this. And if you do, then I encourage you to subscribe to the Newwright Post for more. Mandatory disclaimer that Dudley's views, language, and tone are all his own and not mine. So if you have any snotty complaints, you'll need to subscribe to him to deliver them directly. N.S. Lyons. Back in May, a Black Studies professor, an academic of the type who writes dissertations about the semiotics of Beyoncé, clapped back at one of her peers, a white man who had dared complain that all the jobs in his corner of academia had been given to minorities. Their grading exchange went viral, and the poor schmuck certainly won't be finding work now. Setting aside the content of the argument, I was struck by how these people spoke to one another. I'm sorry. Let's be very clear here. So true. Rolling eyes emoji. You're so right. Rolling eyes emoji. This is an extremely bad look for you. Frankly, these are middle-aged PhDs with prestigious careers, talking like snotty teenagers or sassy black drag queens. Note the overuse of sarcasm, emphasizing asterisks, exclamation points, and pregnant pause ellipses to denote how over it they are. They all speak in the dramatic tone of the mean girl. History PhD here, and this thread is a lot. You see this language and these people everywhere today. You know them by the fluent in sarcasm in bio, the PhDs, the columnists, the policy wonks and wonkettes, the assorted professional quippers and clappers back. Public intellectuals did not talk this way 20 years ago. Lionel Trilling did not call things brat. This is new. Yet this bumptious patois is how our ascendant elites talk now. I call it millennial snot. It's the defining feature of our degraded public discourse and the apotheosis of secular Enlightenment liberalism. The last 20 years of economic decline and consolidation of Blue America into fake laptop work culminated in tweets like this. A social media post from a user named Emmy Ruiz says, "Doubling down on calling for the execution of the Central Park Five is a choice." What is millennial snot? Where did it come from? How did it become the prevailing liberal voice? What exactly is the matter with these people? And are we going to have to suffer this obnoxious style forever? Chapter 1. The Nerds Who Never Got Over High School. Liberals who have time to goof around on social media all day are probably nerds with more or less fake laptop jobs. They aren't working class, otherwise they'd be working all day. But they aren't terribly successful either, otherwise they'd have better things to do. The blue sky American sits awkwardly in the middle, and this feeds his resentment. He got good grades. He's credentialed and believes he's smarter than his boss. He should be running things. If only society weren't so dumb. If only society were fair, like when he was in school, when a kind teacher rewarded his intelligence and punished ne'er-do-wells. Pity the front row kid, the word cell who grinds his youth away for straight A's, only to find that the spoils of the market go to the back row goober who inherits his dad's used car lot. If only there was some way to turn society upside down, so the front row kid could be on top. If only society could be more like grade school. That would be a start. But the nerd doesn't just want to be recognized for his intelligence. He also desperately wants to be cool. He wants to prove to the world that he won't be shoved into a locker anymore. He's with it now. He uses the latest teen slang. He understands the assignment. This is how you get balding hetero professors saying stuff like, "She ate and left no crumbs," and "big mad," and other phrases that will sound embarrassingly dated in a few weeks. The liberal has developed an argot that combines everything he thinks is cool. And what is that exactly? Libs know they're smarter than you, but they're often not as successful as they'd like to be. The resulting inferiority and superiority complexes send the liberal into convulsions of contempt toward healthy, well-adjusted, normal people, along with an attendant parasocial identification with figures they think of as downtrodden underdogs. Underdogs are cool. They hate the straight, successful white man and love everything else, want to be everything else. So they talk like everything and anything else. Their speech and writing is characterized by diction, syntax, and tone that reflects their resentment. And their writing has evolved into a nauseating melange of underdog speak. They're LARPing as snotty teenage girls, sassy black ladies, tongue-rolling drag queens, blue-collar whites, paging hick-lib Tim Walls, or potty-mouthed children. Underdogs all. How else can you explain a middle-aged white woman typing this? A social media post from a user named Zenny Jardin says, "Y'all who are not from Los Angeles don't understand that what Nancy Pelosi is doing to Donald Trump is, she is gangsta checking him. Ask Snoop Dogg. He's failing." A response from a user named King Puig says, "I'm from Los Angeles and I've never heard of this." A final response from Zenny Jardin says, "Homie, what set you from?" Yeah, let's check in with Snoop Dogg about this. Or ask an 11-year-old about Kamala. Or ask a congressman who thinks Kamala's fundraising is bussing FR. A social media post from a user named Ted Liu says, VP Harris's fundraising is bussing FR. She understands the assignment. She'll protect fundamental freedoms and defend democracy. No cap. Donate below to maximize our joint slay. Ted graduated magna cum laude from Georgetown Law. He was born in Taipei. It's impossible to overstate how thoroughly AAVE and gay slang have penetrated the chattering classes, even if they're saying it with a wink. When a tweety white professor tweets an epic clapback, it's as if he imagines an audience of marginalized folks nodding their heads along with him. Tell 'em. What's more, middle-aged academics and politicians did not used to be so sweary. People with advanced degrees did not say, "What the actual fuck," and "fuck right off," and deem their lessers fuckwits and fucktards 20 years ago. But today, they love to cuss liberals. They especially enjoy doing the high-low thing where they pair a beefy vocab word like unreconstructed with a snippy teen girlism like creepy, or a working-class swear like dipshit or shitheel. This is supposed to say, I'm smart, but I'm also cool. Excessive use of like, uptalk, and vocal fry. These were once considered unprofessional ways of speaking, but in the early 2010s, a handful of feminist linguists with Tumblr accounts wrote opinion pieces arguing that the way teen girls talk is actually, totally valid. Like isn't just a crutch, a semantically empty filler word for someone who's not in command of her ideas. It's a lexical hedge. Talking like a teen girl or catty gay became a way for boring straight white people to reposition themselves as youthful rebels. A social media post from a user named Lean McBeans says, I don't flex often here, since it's not what I'm here for. But for anyone that needs the reminder, your opinion of how I tweet can fuck right off. A response from a user named Sophie Catherine G says, don't write a book. Every other word will be like, so no one can trust if you believe every word you say. So he didn't really think what you thought he was thinking, as it was like thinking. Lose the like already. You're not a teenager. Oops, you're like a teenager. A final response from Lean McBeans says, I'm published in peer-reviewed journals. Your opinion can fuck off, and included a kissy face emoji. Let's walk through the example above. Flex is hood slang. Is folksy passive aggression. It's is valley girl. An ellipsis is a pause to convey just how over it she is. Fuck right off is reflexive profanity. I'm published in peer-reviewed journals is an appeal to credentials. A kissy face emoji is cutesy sarcasm. You need to be dropping devastating truth bombs, but with quirky, girlish tude. You have to be a cocky teenage Latina. You have to talk like a badass kid in a Joss Whedon script who outsmarts the adults with clever wordplay. You need to be processing your childhood trauma through a filter of tired Hollywood tropes, like the rich kid 80s movie bully. Remember, Biden is Joby-Wan Kenobi. Tim Walz is the Ted Lasso Veep. He's your dad, and Kamala's your fun aunt, and they're gonna do some hardcore Tarantino stuff to the bad guys. The Dems are the Avengers, and the Republicans are the Sith. The world is your stage. You must enthuse. You need to be gushing. You need to be a bald freak obsessing over celebs like you're paging through Tiger Beat. You need to be saying y'all and sis and BB and hunty and mother like you're in the front row in a drag ball. You, the Vice President of the United States, need to be mothering. A social media post from a user named Danny says, "Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. I'm speaking. K, smiling emoji. She's so mother." 3 crying face emojis. A lot of this boils down to an inability to age with grace. Millennials are now moving into their 40s, and growing old and frumpy is especially difficult for them, because the cultural distance between millennials and their parents was wider than any generational divide since the 60s. Millennials grew up with the internet and access to digital communities their clueless parents didn't know about. They took pride in being in the know in a way that their parents were not. And as millennials grew up, this need for knowingness extended beyond fashion and into politics. On top of this, they are the first generation to grow up alongside social media and selfies. A new digital panopticon constantly gazes upon them and forces them to compare themselves with ever younger, fresher faces. Meanwhile, millennials got shafted by a number of economic trends outside their control. 9/11, the 07 to 08 financial crisis, a pandemic, and an ongoing housing shortage. This rundown will be familiar to anyone who's read an article about the generation, which hamstrung their ability to achieve traditional life milestones like marriage and procreation on time. How does one cope with the economic stasis or even downward mobility that results? They know that they're supposed to be growing up and taking on responsibility, but they can't. So many seem to live in a perpetual adolescence. They literally look younger than previous generations, with neotenous faces and fashions like pink hair and piercings that their elders were more likely to shelve as they transitioned into adulthood. Elder millennials, now in their 40s, don't just listen to but identify with and parasocially stan teen pop stars. Maybe writing like a sassy teenager is just another expression of this desire to stay young at all costs. Maybe because worshiping an increasingly distant youth is less painful than facing the reality that you're middle-aged and still treading water. Downwardly mobile young people have long turned to hipster sneering as a way to signal status. But the internet exploded hipsters' ability to territorialize pop culture. While Gen Xers spent their youth thrifting and curating the perfect record collections and movie taste, a world of Spotify and Netflix left broke millennials with fewer ways to signal their superiority and flaunt their cultural cred. Many of them turned to politics, which for them became their aesthetic. A personality, even. Instead of curating impeccable taste in French New Wave or shoegaze, millennials cultivated a fierce loyalty to being a decent human being. Millennial libs have not only the proper takes on a given issue, but also the proper aesthetic, moral, and political taste. They don't just vote for the right candidate. They laugh at the right jokes, watch the right movies, deploy and retract the right symbols and signifiers at the right time. For example, blacked out Instagram grids. Conservatives, on the other hand, don't just have the wrong politics. More importantly, they aren't cool. They are having a normal one and need to read the room. A social media post from a user named Rebecca Traster says, "Amy Coney Barrett's Rose Garden speech as super spreader event is just hauntingly on the nose on about 15 different levels." End of quote. The caption reads, "On the nose? 15 different levels? Chef's kiss much. I didn't have this level of fuckwittery on my bingo card." As millennial libs age, their desperation to stay cool and in the know is manifesting in all kinds of weird pathologies, but most notably in the way they talk and in the way they talk down to the outgroup. But how did this happen? How did the party of cigar chompers and dick swingers like Lyndon B. Johnson, Ted Kennedy, and Rahm Emanuel turn into a bunch of smarty-pants theater kids and debate club geeks? Chapter 2. The Smarts Party. A few boomers may still think of the Democrats as the working man's party, but this hasn't been true for about 50 years, and it's been laughably, obviously untrue since the turn of the century. In the 40s, between 60 to 70% of the working class voted Dem. Now it's less than half that. Globalization, deindustrialization, the resulting decline of unions, and the ascendancy of neoliberalism under Clinton. These interlocking economic transformations hurt the party's ability to mobilize their historic working-class base by appealing to their economic interests. The smartest Heartland kids guessed correctly that their only hope for upward mobility would be to flee to the coasts and conform to the cultural milieu of the growing professional managerial class, PMC, performing administrative knowledge work in corporations, government, academia, and media. These jobs require not just raw talent for a specific set of tasks, but an ability to accumulate credentials and manipulate the organizational environment, rewarding not just raw talent, but lawyerly persuasion and social maneuvering. Nobody excels in such front-row skills like women, which is probably the main reason why women now outnumber men in both as students in the academy and in managerial roles. It also explains why women are now overwhelmingly liberal. The social incentives that encourage them to move to the coast and take a laptop job are the same ones that encourage them to turn being a lib into their personality. It's simply how you get ahead in the world. So the Dems gradually pivoted away from labor concerns toward issues that mattered to the feminized PMC, like education, climate change, and, most importantly, identity politics. Note that these causes don't require the PMC to relinquish substantial resources or power. They are simply about believing, knowing, feeling, and affirming the right things. Values like science is real appeal to this class, alongside other unhelpful tautologies like love is love and no human is illegal, because they shift the discussion away from the arena of politics, thorny resource and power struggle, into the pseudo-political kindergarten of word games and vibes. I mean, obviously science is real. Duh. What, you want trans kids to just die? Just as the corporate world has come to rely on data-driven decision-making, so too have our liberal technocrats. So to support a moral assertion like no human is illegal, liberals draw from an infinite well of academic studies about the economic benefits of immigration, conducted by people like themselves. Didn't you read the study? Aren't you following the latest research? A social media post from a user named Emily Black Favreau includes an image of Jimmy Kimmel speaking on stage during a live episode of Pod Save America. Jimmy is quoted as saying, "It just so happens that almost every talk show host is a liberal, and that's because it requires a level of intelligence. This technocratic bent is part of what makes the millennial generation of libs distinct. Their rise accelerated an abandonment of the romanticism that helped define the sexual revolution of their parents. With its focus on individual enlightenment and self-actualization, millennials saw what this did to their parents, who leveraged their newfound freedom to have extramarital affairs, but accomplished nothing in moving toward a more egalitarian society. The rationalistic millennial lib therefore hopes to deal only in policy, regulation, and governance, not in myths, heroes, or transcendent values. But this leaves him unable to make absolute moral assertions. Authority now flows from science and data, from the status of being correct. The truth, uncertain as it always is, becomes a matter of rhetorical prowess, a game of owning and dunking. In this game, nothing is capital T true, and opinions need only be validated by the science TM. That is to say, the managerial consensus, which becomes a moral cudgel rather than a quest for understanding. The obsession with data is a pretext for the reality of the liberal position, which is that any grievance expressed in terms that lie outside the current window of acceptable liberal discourse is simply not valid. It's false consciousness. It's mis/disinformation. It's problematic. It's stochastic terror. Political difference is a matter of some people being incorrect. If you only possessed the right knowledge, saw the right charts, the right facts, you'd change your mind. Political conflict, to the modern liberal, is not about struggle for finite resources, insoluble moral differences, or fundamental divergences in our conception of what America ought to be. It's only a failure of half the country, a bunch of dumb hicks, to know what's good for them. The grand liberal challenge has been recast as an effort not to improve the material conditions of the unwashed masses clinging to their guns and religion, but to enlighten them so hard that they rewire their minds. Compromise is now impossible because only one position is correct. And when reality does not comport with the liberal worldview, when data fails to tell the story liberals want to tell, when the chuds stubbornly refuse to get with the program, the only tactic that remains is policing group boundaries via shame and ridicule of the outgroup. If I can't persuade you to agree, I'll publicly humiliate you until you learn your lesson. If old-school Dem strategist James Carville had any hair, you could watch him yank it out over this stuff. But guys like Carville have long since been swapped out for spreadsheet nerds who were born with a silver lanyard around their neck. People who think that joy is a compelling message to families who are eating hot dogs on Wonder Bread for dinner because dad's been feeding an oxy habit since the forklift accident. It's okay. He probably deserves it. He once told a woman on the street that she should smile more often. The modern lib thinks she knows better, and her primary praxis is to shame and humiliate her lessers into submission, to shame them for not knowing and for not educating themselves. And one man, more than any other, taught them how. Chapter 3. Smug, Snark, Smarm, and Snot. Jon Stewart didn't invent the smug, liberal voice. Rush Limbaugh joked about latte-sipping liberals a decade earlier, and Tom Wolfe critiqued self-satisfied elite libs decades before that. But after Stewart took the reins of The Daily Show, the sort of condescending chatter that was once confined to Upper West Side cocktail parties went mainstream. The nihilistic 90s were coming to a close, and the world seemed ready for a newsman who'd openly express how stupid everything is. The Daily Show's original host, Craig Kilborn, satirized the format of the news, skewering public figures regardless of political orientation. Stewart took a more partisan approach, and after George W. Bush came to power, and especially after 9/11, intuited that a portion of America longed to be told that everything sucked and the world was falling apart because of the stupid people in power and their dumb redneck supporters. So the show became about validating the superior intelligence of the liberal PMC. More than any other figure, Stewart shaped the liberal attitude toward conservative voters as contemptible, hapless rubes who deserve relentless mockery. His Daily Show run normalized bitchy snark as the default mode of liberal discourse. Watching Stewart get big clapter for this stuff every weeknight trained a whole generation to dunk as praxis. Jon Stewart's subsequent imitators, the execrable Colbert, Oliver, and B, aren't his true successors. The artisans of the dunk went online, where they could do it at scale. First, the blogosphere spawned an ecosystem of snarky commentators, many of them millennials raised on The Daily Show. Some of the best went pro, writing for sites like Gawker, a blog dedicated to media commentary, with a snarky sensibility inspired by trenchant satire mag Spy. Early on, it employed 80s kids to hound behind-the-scenes media figures like Roger Ailes, Rupert Murdoch, Anna Wintour, and Graydon Carter. But because the audience for that kind of high-minded, in their words, insidery commentary is quite small, they expanded the coverage to include celebs, politicians, techies, really any kind of important person. A lot of those bloggers typing in their underwear in shoebox Brooklyn apartments are now running newsrooms at major papers. Choir Sicha, Gawker's second editor, spent half a decade editing the New York Times style section and is now an editor-at-large at New York Magazine. Nobody did more to shape the Gawker voice than he. If you have ever wondered why libs do that annoying thing where they add an exclamation point on a parenthetical aside, it's detailed in a 2013 New Yorker profile. Quote, Sicha has spent the past decade developing what has become the lingua franca of the internet. Unsnobbish endorsements, presented in a candid, self-consciously hysterical tone. In parentheses, a recent tweet. Vicious news cycle today. Like many others, I just got bumped by Wiener. The quote continues. His humorously helpful parentheticals, doubt-inducing scare quotes, casual likes, dropped carefully, amidst otherwise competent sentences, and gratuitous exclamation points litter the online landscape. End of quote. Around this time, another Gawkeroid wrote a manifesto for snark by describing it as a reaction against smarm, which he defined as a sanctimonious appeal to civility deployed to redirect attention away from misdeeds. Instead of grappling with a critique, smarm says, "How dare you, sir?" Focusing on the presentation of the critique rather than its substance. What they really mean is, "How dare you attack me?" In order to cut through the bullshit of smarm, the author argues, one must be mercilessly biting or snarky. He was right. You do have to get a little mean when you're dealing with manipulative people who weaponize moral concern to deflect criticism. That's why Gawker's writing was so potent. Its broke-ass writers had nothing to lose, and were thus free to critique power with weaponry it wasn't yet equipped to handle. Now it is, although you still see smarm all over the place. In Biden's last big debate showing before lurching off into the sunset, he responded to Trump with a chest full of umbrage and the phrase, "the idea that," a total of 24 times. The idea that I did anything wrong relative to what you're talking about is outrageous. The very idea. How dare Trump even utter the thought? Smarmfest. But the people who read Gawker are not nearly as smart as the people who once wrote it. And the snark we see daily on Twitter pales in comparison to the brilliant takedowns that bloggers executed in the aughts. Nor are they so consistent. Today's lib is just as likely to say, "How dare you, sir?" while simultaneously deploying a limp clapback. I call this posting style snot, which is now so totalizing that it's hard to imagine what a liberal even is without this voice. It's simultaneously smug and sanctimonious, with sneering barbs and pearl clutching, deployed by the same individual, often in the same conversation. A social media post from a user named NYT Politics says, "Depending on whom you ask, Cecile Richards is a national hero or a deeply evil woman." A response from a user named Jennifer Wright says, "Oh, she's a hero. I'm sorry you were confused. I'm glad I could clear up what a woman who has spent her entire life defending women's health is, though. Give me a call if you're confused on whether or not Nazis are cool guys. I can help there too." It's juvenile and snotty like Bart Simpson, while also impressed by its own knowingness like Lisa. It's lazily quippy, like Sorkin or Whedon dialogue, bolting a facsimile of wit onto otherwise unimpressive, self-flattering platitudes. It's an establishment shill who thinks she's a rebel. It's the teacher's pet who thinks she's the class clown. It is the voice of a person whose morality can be reduced to whether or not something is a good look. The egalitarian utopia of secular Enlightenment liberalism has not arrived and never will. And the resentful sense of superiority that results in the modern liberal is all he's got left. Liberalism has no moral lodestar, no ideal to point toward. It doesn't really believe in anything. It purports to love everyone, but it can only love a faceless, abstracted other. It can't love its own drunk uncle, not even at Thanksgiving. All it has is bitterness toward the outgroup, who are defined by their wrongness. Whether it's the Soviets executing capitalist wreckers in the street, or skinny fat libs owning the chuds on Twitter, the animus is the same. It's all they've got. Millennial snot is the apotheosis of this resentment, the terminus of liberalism, a sadistic, juvenile sneer that serves to belittle and patronize the other, no longer as a means to some higher ideal, but as an end in itself. Chapter 4. Snot Gonna Last Forever. Fortunately for all of us, the fact that this style of speaking is codified enough for someone to write an article about it means that millennial snot has probably peaked. You can already see libs starting to make fun of each other for speaking with excessive snot. Zoomers have picked up on millennial speech patterns and have started to openly mock them as millennial core. Trust that Gen Alpha is looking at their dork-ass parents who tweet like this and thinking, "I will never say y'all. I will never write for emphasis. I will never speak like a GPT trained on Chandler Bing dialogue. I will never, ever call someone a douche canoe." Maybe this is simply the generational turnover of slang, but it may represent more than that. Gen Z, having tasted the bitter fruit of rationalism, are far less interested in debating or clapping back on Twitter. Even more strikingly, they're returning to God and seeking a re-enchantment of the world. In liberal eschatology, this wasn't really supposed to happen. The world was supposed to get ever more secular and rational until utopia happened somehow. Zoomers seem to be looking for something realer than the rationale, something more authentic and human. Either way, none of these clapter-seeking comedians like John Oliver or Samantha Bee are going to be on TV for long. Young people are bored of this stuff. Jon Stewart's been trotting out the same bits since longer than Zoomers have been alive. What a millennial might consider to be a perfect snotty dunk is to the Zoomer simply cringe. And since millennials care so much about looking cool to young people, we can expect them to dial back the snot too. It's going to take a few more years, but snot will pass away. It has to. The Dems, and more broadly the political left, aren't going to survive another decade of talking down to a majority of the country. 2 decades of pervasive snot resulted in the rise of MAGA, and potentially 2 presidential terms for Trump. Meanwhile, the actually hip kids, like effortlessly cool Dasha and Anna of the buzzy and transgressive Red Scare podcast, have already broken the spell. The downtown duo harken back to a time before over-socialized, neurotic nerds ran everything. Like them, you too can pierce through snot with plain-spoken sincerity. If someone gets snotty with you, you can simply shrug your shoulders and call them retarded. Now, you can stand up to snot and survive. Millennial snot rests upon a foundation of shared understanding that there is nothing less cool than being a conservative. And for a long time, libs had the institutional power to perpetuate this belief. This dominance felt increasingly unshakable throughout the Obama years and into the pandemic. But now it feels like this hegemony is crumbling. The left-liberal coalition isn't what it used to be, and the Dems are scrambling to pander to white dudes and other moderates with ads that try to pretend the libs haven't spent the last 20 years exclusively trying to shame them into submission. Whether this works or not, the age of Jon Stewart liberalism is coming to a close. One day, we will speak to one another like adults. We will yank the theater kids off the stage and stuff them back into the lockers where they belong. We'll make it illegal to say, "my dude," or "my guy." A new age of sincerity and clarity is nigh. We're going to make discourse great again. If you enjoyed this piece by Dudley, be sure to check out more from him at the New Right Post. That concludes On Millennial Snot, an article from October 9th, 2024, in the publication The Upheaval.
The following is an article in the publication Bad Catitude from February 5th, 2025. The title of the article is The End of Weaponized Empathy. The subtitle reads, Stop Buttering Up the Buttercups. It was written by Elgato Malo. Step 1. How does this image make you feel? Remember your answer. There will be a test. The author included a screenshot of a TikTok video from user Povabi. The image shows a young woman in an airport with text that reads, Feeling silly for crying in the airport after seeing a MAGA hat, but 4 other women were crying too. Grief has no timeline. Action is coming. End of quote. Narrator. Action was not coming. This movie seems to be on auto-repeat all over social media right now. It's astonishing the breakdowns and breakage that seem to have been triggered by 2 weeks of The Donald. Leaving aside the rightness or wrongness of all this opinion and histrionic hurdy-burly, I find the overall pathology fascinating. I also think it likely means something very different than most are inclined to assume. Why is Becky from Vassar not only having this meltdown, but forensically documenting it in full living color online for all the world to see? This seems an odd response to hurt. So what drives this? The author included a meme featuring a pink-haired female Wojak character, sometimes referred to as Doomer Girl, in a contemplative pose. The text overlay reads, I should film my mental breakdown and post it online. My sense is that this is not just I'm upset, it's performance art as manipulation. Sure, some of it is tribal virtue and issue signaling, but mostly it looks to me to be a sort of bat signal to guilt-trip people into helping the more Machiavellian of the theater kids. It's a natural human impulse to want to help those that look scared or hurt. It's part of the goodness of many humans. But it's also a weakness that can be preyed upon, used to advantage. And I think we're seeing a lot of that. The ability to manipulate others while claiming virtue and status for so doing attracts cluster B traits like rotting fruit attracts wasps. This performative fragility has weaponized empathy, and for a time, this has proven a very effective tactic of passive-aggressive emotional grifting. The issue is that, past a certain point, people simply stop caring about you and your endless, needy demands for the world to order itself around your right not to be offended as the cornerstone and non-negotiable demand of your sense of well-being and security. It becomes too tiresome and intrusive to support and too obvious a ploy to keep working. You lose your ability to suck in the rubes because the demands grow ever more baroque and the aggressions needed to elicit them grow ever more micro. The author included a political meme that parodies the "Change My Mind" format, originally featuring Steven Crowder. In this version, a person wearing a pink pussy hat sits at the desk with a scowling expression, and the sign has been changed to read, "I'm offended, change your mind." But "my emotions are your fault, fix it" is not really much of an axis mundi for one's character, is it? Eventually, it slips over into just being grating, and the response rates to this cry-bully campaign drop. This results in upped intensity to try to get the attention and authority back, and this rapidly results in a feedback loop of accusing any who will not accommodate you of being somehow cruel, and suddenly, just wanting to be left alone gets cast as malicious. The author included a cover of New York Magazine depicting a crowded party of young, formally dressed people. The bold headline, "The Cruel Kids Table," along with the sub-headline, "Out Late with the Young Right," as they contemplate cultural domination, contextualizes the scene as an inside look at a new generation of conservative socialites. This can only be taken so far. When the very people accusing you of lacking concern are actually playing upon your concern and using it to manipulate you, you eventually wise up. It snaps into focus that this was never a damsel in distress. It was a long con. At its most charitable, this was just bad Pavlovian conditioning induced by getting a cookie every time you throw a tantrum, but a lot of it is done with malice aforethought. Now go back and look at the image from the beginning of the piece. Now, how does it make you feel? It's amazing how broken and repulsive this looks once you stop feeling a need to protect it. There is going to be a lot of crying alone as this trick ceases to function. The author included a side-by-side image to create a strong visual contrast between two different cultural archetypes. On the left is a modern-looking person with brightly colored hair and tattoos yelling intensely, while on the right, the sitcom character George Costanza sits placidly in a diner. The image caption reads, "Just because you want it to be a thing does not mean it's a thing." I don't mean to be mean. Our tear-bedecked gate grizzler may well be in acute distress, but pretending like it's all somehow our problem to fix instead of hers when she is the one lacking basic human resiliency of a level at which 5-year-olds have been historically expected to perform does not help anyone, least of all our airport anxious Annies. That's her being mean to the rest of us and trying to make her problems our problems. Do you suspect she had any sympathy for others who disliked boy bands for Harris hats? I'm guessing she'd have railed at them and defended the wearer. And that's the key pivot, isn't it? The author included 2 screenshots from the social media account of Sarah Wood. The first screenshot shows her post, which reads, "If you fly a Trump flag and not an American flag, you make clear where you have your allegiance," while the second shows her profile bio, which states, "Social media director at votevets.org, visual creator, writer, saxophone player, Boston fan. Opinions here only represent me. Rainbow flag emoji." It's one big game of punch, no punchbacks. Empathy for me but not for thee. That is not empathy. It's tactical morality applied through the performance of aggrievement. But justification by sad is no basis for an ethical system. What has changed is that the vast Abilene paradox of everyone thinking this was mostly absurd, but no one speaking up or doing anything about it has broken. It feels like a shift in sentiment, but it's not. It's the popping of a preference falsification bubble in which sentiment was widely misreported and faked in order to conform to incorrect perceptions of what was popular. When it pops, it all goes at once, and suddenly everyone is looking around saying, "Wait a minute, none of you liked this either?" And realizing that the minority they thought themselves to constitute had long been a majority. This is the power of censorship and saturation propaganda. You can mistake a minority for a majority or an extortionist for an ethicist. The public lacks any accurate view into its own collective mind. The damn the brothers and sisters of perpetual offendedness are feeling break is one of opinion and social taboo. We were all told we had to care about this, hectored into stopping the ride every time any kid cried, told that that was normal, required, morally obligatory. Team Aggrievement are now struggling with the sound of silence in response to the previously magic words of their professions of perturbation. They are not ready to hear this. But they need to. The author included a 2-panel meme. The top panel shows King Joffrey from Game of Thrones with the caption, "I'm offended," while the bottom panel shows Tony Soprano from The Sopranos shrugging and asking, "Who gives a shit?" At a certain point, buttercups need to toughen up, and more sympathy for their self-cultivated frailty and emotional incapacity is not a path to self-governance or self-confidence. It's just more cookies for cry bullies. And it's okay to say so. It's okay to say no. It's okay to stop falling for this, and it's not on you to make it right. It's the empathetic here who have been taking years of abuse heaped upon them by the narcissistic. The irony is thick enough to stand a spoon in. The very trait you were accused of lacking was used to manipulate you into kowtowing to the people who lacked it, and who would certainly have never returned such a favor if asked. This ends when we stop believing that the self-inculcated fragility of others is somehow on us to fix, because they have raised it to the level of passive-aggressive performance art. The author included an image from the movie Good Will Hunting. In the image, Robin Williams is comforting Matt Damon, with the caption reading, "It's not your fault." Never was. That concludes The End of Weaponized Empathy, an article from February 5th, 2025 in the publication Bad Catitude.
The following is an article in the publication Devon Substack from November 13th, 2024. The title of the article is The Trillionaires of Mars. The subtitle reads, "Head Up, Young Man." It was written by Devin Erickson. The author included an image of an intricately designed golden medallion with a central figure and ornate details. The image caption reads, "Mars surrounded by trophies, Veronese Moderno." The first entity to establish a Mars colony will be the universe's first trillionaire. Lately, we've had a lot of puddlefish whining about how we shouldn't go to Mars. Some of them actually think they get a vote, based on economic illiteracy and the delusion that SpaceX is somehow part of the U.S. federal government. Closed caption for the hard of thinking, it isn't. But others just think they are giving good investment advice. SpaceX investors can do what they want, but Mars is a frozen wasteland full of nothing but near vacuum and rocks. So why would anyone want to go there? The author included an X.com post by user Doge Designer. It reads, "Elon Musk is projected to become world's first trillionaire. He said, 'My plan is to use the money to get humanity to Mars and preserve the light of consciousness.'" End of quote. Elon Musk likes to answer this question by pointing out that it's not a good idea to store all humanity's eggs in one basket. He's right, but this kind of argument isn't comprehensible to everyone, nor is it the full picture. So now it's the SF writer's turn. And therefore I present to you an economic roadmap for the future of humanity, in which Devin Erickson explains how to bring about a second industrial revolution and what the next step is on the road to becoming a Kardashev 1 civilization. The invention of manufacturing and the transition from an agricultural to a manufacturing economy is called the Industrial Revolution, because its effect on the state of not only the economy, but daily life and the entire human world was revolutionary, unprecedented, unimaginable, understandable only in hindsight. Everything changed. Imagine trying to describe the modern world to your pre-industrial ancestors. We took that black stuff that seeps out of the ground, set it on fire, and used the fire to turn things that do the work of skilled craftsmen, only thousands of times faster. And now we all have horseless carriages and talking abacuses that can send a message to the other side of the planet in the time it takes to cough. This would sound like nonsense, because to them, tar was just sticky black stuff that you find in the bottom of bogs, and coal was a dirty rock, and steam was the stuff that came out of your tea kettle. And Mars? Well, Mars is just a frozen, airless desert, right? To bring about technological and economic revolutions, you have to learn to see value in new ways. The conquistadors who first introduced civilization to the Americas were looking for spices and gold. That was their definition of value. But if all they found was gold, all they would have gained was an unprecedented economic crisis. With their pre-industrial knowledge of economics, they didn't understand that gold was a token of value, not a store of value. A massive influx of gold alone would have brought about unprecedented inflation. Ouch. Fortunately for Europe, civilization and humanity, they found real value as well, of sorts they were looking for. Land, timber, navigable rivers, potatoes. Yes, potatoes. The author included an image of a potato. The image caption reads, "Wealth?" That means more workers, more craftsmen, more geniuses to invent things, more civilization. Potatoes? Unexpected, but valuable. So what about Mars? Mars is just a frozen, airless desert, right? Well, for those of you who can read between the blatantly obvious lines, maybe not. But how? Well, what do you need for an industrial revolution? You need a new source of cheaper energy. The first one had wood, coal, and oil, replacing animal labor and wind turbines, which are only suitable for grinding flour for medieval peasants. You need cheap raw materials. The New World abounded with timber and ore, and bigger populations from better crops and new energy sources meant cheaper mining. You need clever people to figure out new technologies. The West was never short of smart people, and now they had more than ever. Thanks to the potatoes. You need a permissive legal environment. Enterprises that push the technological envelope tend not to be established companies trying something new. These entities already have their revenue model. Instead, new tech comes from startups, all the way from well-funded, high-tech enterprises to the often surprising ingenuity of 3 dudes in a shed. The first industrial revolution had America, and England, which at the time were quite capitalist. Cheap energy, cheap raw materials, technically educated people, free market capitalism. In order to have a new industrial revolution, you need an order of magnitude increase in some, or ideally all, of these things. Now we are ready to answer the question, why Mars? The next level of the human economy is post-terrestrial, and it rests on three pillars as its foundation: Earth, the asteroid belt, and Mars. Earth. Right now, Earth is everything. It's where we keep all our stuff. The author included an image of the cartoon character The Tick from the animated series of the same name. In a meme format, the image features the quote, "You can't destroy the Earth. That's where I keep all my stuff." In the future, Earth is merely very important. It's where people want to live. It's the swanky real estate. It's not only where you store most of your people, it's where you especially store anyone who works with data, and therefore doesn't have to be in any particular place to do his work. Earth is the suburbs. It's the Hamptons. It's Myrtle Beach and Key Largo. In the near future, it's also where your food comes from. But in a post-terrestrial economy, that changes quickly with hydroponics and genetic engineering. The asteroid belt. The asteroid belt is where your accessible raw materials are. And it beats Earth not just by an order of magnitude, but by many. To understand why, here's physics lesson number 1. Gravity wells. We've all heard the local gravitation fields of planets referred to as wells. But to fully understand, we really need to lean into the metaphor. It explains a lot. The author included an image of a 3D representation of a gravity well. Imagine Earth's gravity as a deep, deep pit. Steep sides, hard to get out of. And heavy stuff sinks to the bottom. Don't believe me? Can't fully visualize it? Try it yourself. Fill a jar with sand, water, and lead buckshot. Shake the jar, watch it sort itself. Layer of buckshot at the bottom, layer of sand on top of that, clear water at the top. Yes, the lighter stuff will fill the gaps in the heavier stuff, but all the heavier stuff will sink to the bottom. The author included an image of a cross-sectional illustration of the Earth's layers, showing the crust, mantle, outer core, and inner core. Well, the Earth is like the jar. It's got a core of iron and heavy radioactive elements, and the lighter stuff is on top. The only heavy elements and metals we can mine on Earth are the small amounts near the surface, which are there because the Earth isn't as fluid and hasn't been shaken quite as hard as that jar. Which means that the Earth is a metal-poor, heavy element-poor environment. We just don't think of it that way because it's what we are used to. And it's a major bottleneck holding our industrial development back. Not because these elements will run out, but because the expense of extracting them limits availability and drives costs up. So what about the asteroid belt? Well, the mass of the asteroid belt is roughly 0.05% of Earth's mass. But, unlike the Earth, the asteroid belt isn't a big lump of material, sitting in its own steep gravity well. It's a powder, a spray of fine dust orbiting the sun. The largest asteroid is only about the size of Texas, and most are much smaller. The author included an image of a solar system map showing the orbits of planets and various groups of asteroids, such as Trojans and Greeks. And the thing about powder is that it has a really high ratio of surface area to mass. Everything is near the surface, because surface is all there is. Not only can you cut in easily, you can break the whole rock apart to get at the valuable stuff inside. And is there ever valuable stuff inside? One single asteroid, 16 Psyche, some 140 miles across, has an estimated value at today's market prices of $100 quadrillion. You read that right. That's roughly 900 times the value of the entire world economy. The author included an artist's rendering of 16 Psyche, a metallic asteroid believed to be the core of a planetesimal. The image depicts its rugged, heavily cratered surface with a mixture of dark and reddish-brown tones set against the blackness of space. All of civilization. Everything. One asteroid. Now, does that mean it would actually sell for that much? Of course not. What would happen if you extracted all that stuff is that the market prices of all those metals and heavy elements would crash. They'd all become dirt cheap. In fact, that's a poor metaphor, because dirt would be a lot more expensive than iron. We'd be making bullets out of gold. But, unlike the gold the conquistadors brought back, these metals aren't just tokens of value, only useful as currency because they are rare. They have inherent value because you make stuff out of them. So all the stuff you can make out of them would get a whole lot cheaper. That's pretty much everything. But what about all the energy we would need? Well, space solves that too. If you're close to the sun and you have some kind of solar panel fetish, you use those. No air in space, no weather, nothing to get in the way. Just point them at the big bright thing for free electricity. If you're not close to the sun or you just don't like dicking around with second-rate methods, well, there's plenty of everything in the asteroid belt, including fissionables. Really, the energy problem has been solved for over 50 years, but that solution has been held back. See, on Earth, we have these things called governments, which is a fancy name for a bunch of theater kids who studied liberal arts in college and aren't good at anything but stuffing ballot boxes and taking bribes. Their hobbies include banning things they don't understand, regulating things they don't understand, and visiting their best buddy Jeff on his private island. But there aren't any of them in space. And if they go there, well, good luck enforcing your regulations on a volume of 3.59 times 10 to the 30th power cubic kilometers. So fissionables, the real energy solution until we solve fusion containment, are back on the menu. The fact that traditional territory-based governments don't work so well in space also solves our need for free market capitalism. So, cheap energy, cheap raw materials, free market capitalism, and smart, technically educated people. It's all there. Mars. Around now, someone will be objecting that asteroid mining ain't so cheap. Sure, all that shiny stuff is lying around in plain view, but getting there is really, really difficult. At least for now. Yes, that's true. But how is it difficult? In exactly what way? Time for physics lesson number 2. This one is also about gravity wells. If you go back to thinking about a planet's gravity as a well or pit, then you can think about the solar system as a sort of flat surface. Actually a gently sloping bowl due to the gravity of the distant sun, with deep pits in it representing the planet's gravity. Well, the hard part is getting out of that pit. The author included an infographic titled, "Gravity Wells, Scaled to Earth Surface Gravity." It displays various planets and moons of the solar system as gravity wells. Each well is scaled to show how much energy is needed to escape the gravitational pull, equivalent to escaping Earth's gravity if it extended to that depth. The caption reads, "Gravity Wells, XKCD." The reason rocket science, actually rocket engineering, is so hard that it's a euphemism for really hard stuff is that we live in a really deep gravity pit. Earth's gravity exerts a constant acceleration of about 10 meters per second on everything near its surface. That means that everything near the surface is going to fall, picking up speed until it finds something to rest on. To accelerate upwards so fast that you rise up out of the pit despite gravity, you need a powerful engine and a lot of fuel and something called reaction mass, which you don't need to worry about reading this beyond knowing that all those things are heavy. Because they're heavy, you need a still more powerful engine and still more fuel/oxidizer/reaction mass, which are heavy. And on and on and on it goes. But if you can do all that really, really hard engineering and get out of that pit, then the gravity acceleration you must overcome to move away from the sun is 0.006 meters per second, which you could easily do by farting. So Earth's gravity well is a climbing wall. But at the top of that climbing wall is a skating rink, and it's really easy to glide around. So much of the difficulty, if not much of the delay, in travel to the asteroid belt is getting off Earth's front driveway. But what about Mars? Well, Mars's gravity acceleration is about a third of Earth's, a little over 3.5 meters per second squared. Rocket science is not so difficult on Mars. Closed caption for the heart of thinking, Devon is speaking comparatively. Rocket engineering is still difficult. So if you think SpaceX can move stuff to Earth orbit cheaply now, with their fancy reusable rocket boosters, and all their light years ahead of NASA space tech and their $2 million Starship launches, you ain't seen nothing yet. On Mars, with its 1/3 gravity and thin atmosphere, you wouldn't even need a rocket to achieve escape velocity. Just fling stuff into space with a big railgun. That's why Mars. The author included an image of a series of 4 planets in different stages of terraforming, transitioning from a barren, reddish planet to a lush, Earth-like planet. The caption reads, "Terraforming Mars." The value of Mars isn't the balmy weather, the fresh air, or even Deja Thores in a chainmail bikini. The author included an image of a woman in a fantasy warrior costume, wearing ornate gold and green armor, standing in a desert landscape. The caption reads, "Not important, really. It's the fact that here you have a planet where people can live in sealed habitats above or below the surface. And it's really, really easy to throw things into space and get them to and from the asteroid belt. In other words, if Earth is the suburbs and the belt is the mine, Mars is your industrial zone. Hell, you don't even need to mine asteroids in place. Depending on the delta V cost, you can just attach boosters to your smaller rocks and push them right into Mars orbit. It's called a Hohmann transfer. But whether you are moving metal from a mobile refinery, raw ore, or entire rocks, cargo is cheap to move in space, at least compared to space launch from Earth's surface. Space isn't an ocean, you see. There are no waves, your cargo can't sink, and there's no air to slow it down. so you don't load it up into a ship and sail the ship somewhere. That's pre-spaceflight thinking. What you do is you tie your cargo in a big bundle, give it a carefully aimed push, and glide into a Mars orbit. Then you make stuff out of it in your factories on Mars. Then you toss it to Earth. Takes a while gliding through the void. But so what? There's no crew to get bored or breathe up all the oxygen. You just wait patiently and catch it on the far end. Sure, re-entry is a bit of a problem, and you need heat shields and stuff. But that's a hell of a lot easier problem than making a rocket go the other way. And you don't bother moving a lot of it to Earth, because you can have all, or at least most, of your near-Earth industry on the Moon. No re-entry necessary. Got all that? If so, we are finally done. You now understand this. A Mars colony is the next step in human civilization. It is not a token exploratory feat, but a critical center point of the post-terrestrial economy. This is how humanity ascends. Instead of dicking around on one single planet, fighting stupid little wars over stupid little oil fields, and generally being the galactic equivalent of a bunch of stupid tribal yaboos with stone-tipped arrows and bone through our noses. You and I and everyone else alive today are unfortunate enough to live in humanity's embarrassingly primitive, poo-flinging monkey period. But if we are not too stupid or ignorant to imagine what the next step looks like, we can lay the foundation for getting there. Don't be a puddlefish. The author included an image of an angry cartoon fish sitting in a small pool of water with crossed arms and an annoyed expression. The caption reads, "I don't want to go to space." Devin Erickson is the author of Theft of Fire, Orbital Space Number 1. You can find a 3-chapter preview and additional retailers at devinerickson.com. Read it already? You are strongly encouraged to leave a rating on Amazon, Goodreads, or your retailer of choice. And then, even more importantly, recommend it to friends, co-workers, and giving it a shout-out on social media. Personal recommendations are the lifeblood of independent publishing. The author included an advertisement for White Cat, a 3D printed model of an asteroid mining ship of the same name, in the book Theft of Fire. The caption reads, "Mike Kasberg designed a White Cat 3D printable kit card. What? A perfect way to celebrate the 1-year publication anniversary. Get the free design here." That concludes The Trillionaires of Mars, an article from November 13th, 2024, in the publication Devin's Substack. The following is an article in the publication The American Sun from March 3rd, 2025. The title of the article is Sarah J. Maas Ruined a Generation of Women. It was written by Mongoose. The author included an image of the book cover for A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. A quote reads, "High fae mostly marry, but if they're blessed, they'll find their mate, their equal, their match in every way. High fae wed without the mating bond, but if you find your mate, the bond is so deep that marriage is insignificant in comparison." From A Court of Thorns and Roses, pages 175 to 176. Another quote reads, "And now, me. It is me you love, and you will ordain for me, as for them." From Gilgamesh, finishing his rejection of the goddess Ishtar, Tablet 6 of The Epic of Gilgamesh. Hello again. I let the intrusive thoughts and intrusive THOTs win, and so I went and bought the seminal romantasy smut novel, A Court of Thorns and Roses, and subsequently hate-read it in 10 hours, including my annotations. I purchased the 2020 second edition hardback, hoping that maybe when I was done with this review project, I could hollow it out and use it as the world's most evil gun case. I find myself questioning my own intentions back then, and my annotated copy may be the single most cursed object I own. Speaking as a man with multiple anime statues, both volumes of the Monster Girl Encyclopedia, pagan religious artifacts, Japanese model aircraft magazines, that for some reason needed to include gravure photo shoots in them, and a couple firearms made in China. If you are looking for a yay or nay recommendation and little else, stop here. This book may damage your soul, it will steal your vril, and is outclassed both as literature and slop entertainment by Dan Abnett's Gunt's Ghosts. If you still need easy reading literature, Conan, Solomon Kane, C.S. Lewis, among many others, will satiate your need for unchallenging but enjoyable literature. If you are looking for romantic fantasy that meets basic writing quality standards, I would recommend Fate/Stay Night, Unlimited Blade Works, or the clean versions of the original Fate visual novel. I also would recommend literally anything else outside this genre. Also worth noting is that I'm not going to be explaining a ton of the jargon I use here, so please feel free to search up any neologisms you don't recognize. We are operating well outside the intended use case of the English language, like using a Dremel as an end lathe. For those interested in the content/cultural import of this accursed tome, venture onward as I guide ye forth into the vile world of porn made by women, for women. A Court of Thorns and Roses, ACOTAR for short, and how I will be referring to it for the rest of this review, was originally published in 2015 by fantasy author Sarah J. Maas. And if your senses are tingling, check her Wikipedia page. They're right, every time. Considered the most popular novel of the romantasy genre, a portmanteau of romance and fantasy, ACOTAR has served as the gateway drug for many a woman who would later lust after Count Orlok from Nosferatu 2024, as well as most of the denizens of book talk, young women talking about these romance novels. It is here, dearest and most beloved reader, that I need to make a discursus to discuss the concept of pornography, because I cannot delve the topics broached further without making it clear how a proper view of porn works and what is and isn't porn. Porn most typically is thought of in the popular context as titillating images or videos of a sexual nature. Some colloquial usages of porn may invoke other forms, such as r/nature porn, good pics of nature, or the old Warhammer 40K pejorative, bolter porn, referring to 40K fiction that is little more than pure combat and ultra-violence. These themselves lack the erotic and sensual context of the popular conception of pornography, rather merely using the concept of porn as explicit titillation to expound upon an idea or critique in a vulgar manner. So I would propose, to truly encompass the novel itself, we expand our understanding of pornographic materials to include anything intended to titillate in an erotic concept, with or without explicit content. There is no reading of Chapter 21 of ACOTAR that isn't erotic and rape/BDSM adjacent. As such, I would argue that the entire novel merely serves as pornography, or framing for pornography. This itself undermines much of the book talk discourse on the novel itself. which I will be going over after a plot and character analysis. Before I provide a synopsis and discourse on themes, or the lack thereof, I would like to also take a moment to paint a picture of Sarah Moss's prose. Simply put, she writes like a middling fan fiction author. The chapters are extremely short, giving the impression of vignettes written in 3 to 5 day stints by a literotica, AO3, Tumblr, or Wattpad writer. I'm no stranger to fanfic. There is a weird overlap between weird fanfic and tabletop games. And I'm old enough to remember old TG culture on 4chan. This isn't factoring the weekend smut thread from old TG. My point here is simple. I've read some shitty fanfic in my time, and this is basically your average fanfiction with a professional editor. Moss feels the need to describe everything, regardless of its importance to tone or themes. This left me so confused at first that I physically stood up, walked to my study, and opened random books to random pages to ensure that it did not stick out due to how long it had been since I last read fiction, rather than just being a characteristic of a poor writer. I was not mistaken. Moss lacks inspiration and confidence in her audience's ability to imagine anything other than the most graphic sex scenes, which are softballed likely for mass-market editorial reasons. I would propose the radical proposition that any vivid descriptions of things should go towards building the tone/theme of a work, rather than merely painting a mental picture, such as how Dostoevsky depicts Petrograd in Crime and Punishment. A Kotar's descriptions serve to rotely portray a fantasy world for the audience, like a D&D setting book, rather than weaving the pieces together for the purpose of conveying tone. I'd even go so far as to say that the work itself has the general energy and mood of a poorly retold but acceptable tabletop role-playing game campaign, interspersed with smut. So what is the basic premise here? If you look at ACOTAR's Wikipedia page, you will find it much like the Wikipedia pages of things like the Holocaust or vaccines, lacking key information, self-contradicting details, or as minimal specifics as possible. The premise that this novel has sex in it at all isn't addressed, and the plot isn't expounded upon beyond the blurb given in the dust cover. The blurb does poorly in addressing what the plot actually is, so I'll try my best to summarize it here. I will also warn the reader that I'm going in chronological order for the novel, not the actual plot itself, because it's easier and less complicated. About 1/3 of the novel is predicated on the main character not knowing anything about Tamlin and the lore, which in turn makes a lot of stupid stuff happen. So basically on the planet there are humans and fairies. The fairies were mean to the humans. Slavery and whatnot, it's vague. And at some point around 500 years ago, that starts a war. One of the fairy generals, Queen Amarantha, had her sister tricked and killed by the humans. She then goes on a murder spree and develops a psychotic hatred of humans. Queen Amarantha wants to bang an underage fairy, Tamlin, and keeps coming on to him. But because she was mean to the humans after the war, killed all her slaves, he doesn't like her. Also, she's kind of mad about a human killing her sister. But the lore, again, is just a setup for Fae kidnapping and not rape. Also worth noting that this takes place on not the British Isles. So Amarantha is from Ireland, and Tamlin is from Middle England. This garbage has a wiki if you need more details. But I'm not going into more detail for a British Islands trace. So Amarantha goes to the fairy portion of the British Isles. Prythian, not Prithia, but Prythian, and deceives everybody into buying her bullshit until she magically enslaves them. In this process, Tamlin and his people are invited to a masquerade ball, in which Amarantha curses them to forever wear their masks, and have their magic weakened if Tamlin can't find a human who hates fairies to love him in 7 by 7 years. To this end, Tamlin sends his friends disguised as massive wolves into the human area, Cornwall, until one of them is killed by some retarded woman who hates fairies. The main character, Feyru, pronounced in book as Feyra, but in English as fairy. Feyru kills the wolf, and so Tamlin kidnaps her. This then entails a bunch of angst and a weird scene at the end of a sex spring ritual, where Tamlin bites her erotically but doesn't rape her. Undertones clear, though. Eventually they fall in love, but before she can confess her love, Tamlin sends her away to protect her, which ultimately results in her returning to protect him from the evil Queen Amarantha and going through her trials to prove her love and save him. During this, a different Fey Lord, Rhys, sexually humiliates Feyru in front of Tamlin to please Amarantha and work on being a triple agent. But Tamlin can't do anything or show any emotion, because it might give away what tortures him the most. This mostly involves a lot of weird BDSM-adjacent stuff, where Feyru is forced to put on a skimpy dress, wear body paint, to show whether Tamlin touches her or not, gets drugged, and has to dance while drugged in front of everybody. Fey beats the challenges by realizing the answer to the world's most obvious riddle. The answer is love. And she goes to get with Tamlin, whose mask falls off, and she sees that he's just as good-looking as she'd dreamed. Literally paraphrasing an exact line. That's where A Kotar ends. There are other books, but this is where the first one in the series ends. I'd like to analyze a couple of the characters for a bit before we move on to the later lore I gleaned from the wiki and female readers of this slop. Mainly, I'd like to talk about Feyre and Tamlin, the heroine and main love interest. Rhys appears later, and in the second book, Feyre dumps Tamlin for the more powerful, more handsome, more ancient, more sexy, and more dark shadow daddy Rhys, leaving Tamlin to rot in his estate. More on this later. Feyre could best be identified as the most woman-brained woman of all time. She describes her looks on pages 202-203 as, "I had looked pretty, feminine. I wouldn't go so far as to call myself a beauty. I hadn't cringed." When being complimented by Tamlin, Moss does this super annoying thing with periods and dashes. Bear with it. This comes after Tamlin compliments her beauty, which comes after the weird neck-biting scene, which itself is the first moment Feyre is truly horny for her super handsome, super powerful, shape-shifting fairy kidnapper. Which is where Feyre and Tamlin's relationship truly begins to be reciprocal. Prior to this point, Tamlin had developed, at the very least, lust for her, which he acts upon when possessed by powerful magic during the bite sequence. Back to Feyru's character, the adjectives I would choose to describe her would mostly come from my annotations. Dumb, retarded, stubborn, and indifferent emoji. Feyru will repeatedly do dangerous and foolish things, ignore direct orders, endanger herself and others through foolishness, and so on, while never facing consequences beyond titillating BDSM-adjacent stuff. Her tendency to do this drives most of the drama and events of the novel. She evokes the heroine of Pride and Prejudice if Jane Austen either had too many or too few chromosomes. Feyre, also worth noting, is never objectively described or depicted as weak. Rather, everyone around her coincidentally possesses powers far beyond her own, abnegating the classic woman written by man trope of woman weak. It's the same thing. The disparity in power is depicted, but Feyre is never explicitly brought down. Meanwhile, To me, Fyra's love interest, kidnapper, and, technically speaking, liege lord Tamlin remains the most interesting character and facet of the novel, especially considering context. So I will ask the reader to forgive me if I belabor any points here. Tamlin is a man, albeit a high fae man, written by a woman. Tamlin forms a locus of interest for a wide range of reasons. To start with, I should comment on how Tamlin is described. He's muscular. This forms basically a third of all descriptions of him or what he's doing. Tanned, mentioned all the time, green-eyed, dirty blonde, strong-jawed, and more interestingly, never described as handsome. Tamlin is described as beautiful or captivating or sensuous. And if he's not described like that, he's given attributes more commonly given to predators, mostly feline to be precise. He slinks about, coils, etc. Interestingly, Moss never describes attractive men as handsome. Gorgeous, sensuous, and beautiful seem to form her repertoire of adjectives for attractive members of the ironically fairer sex. Tamlin also finds himself near constantly contrasted with Feyre's first sexual partner, Isaac Hale, with whom she would fornicate with as a reprieve from the drudgery of taking care of her father and sisters. Tamlin essentially mogs Isaac, indicating that Moss's love interests exist in a sort of Dragon Ball Z-esque power scaling of hypergamy. Tamlin is more powerful and hot than Isaac, Rhys more so than Tamlin, and so on. Tamlin's character beyond his physique is intriguing, mostly because the fans of Moss hate him, giving him the derisive name Tampon. Tamlin's primary motivation throughout the book, as High Lord of the Spring Court, jurisdictions are courts because women like intrigue, I guess, is to protect and provide for those who live within his jurisdiction, and as a result are his responsibility. Amarantha curses his court, so he makes the strategic sacrifice to find a human woman who hates Fae, willing to kill a Fae unprovoked, and attempt to get her to fall in love with him to prevent their total subjugation by the evil queen Amarantha. To this end, he sent a ton of his friends into the human realms to be killed until Fyro kills one. When Fyro learns this was his actual game plan, she has a level of disgust, as if attempting to forestall the evil wiles of a wicked witch to the benefit of one's citizens lacks moral character. Because Tamlin was willing to make the immense sacrifice of letting personal friends and confidants die in the process. But also remember that Tamlin himself is a man written by a woman. So while he possesses heroic and self-sacrificial qualities, he also possesses all the subtlety as a romantic interest as an anime woman with O-cups, if you know what to look for. Well, I'm underselling my case here. Hitomi Tanaka does exist. No man caters to female desires as well as Tamlin. He's attentive and always knows what's on Feyre's mind, how she's feeling, and what she wants. And in fact, the writing depicts this so poorly that I legitimately spent one half of the novel under the impression that, as a magical fairy boy, he can read her mind. I had to go to the Akotar wiki to figure out his true powers, which do not actually include mind reading. When he's not doting on her, he's doing important fairy hot boy stuff like being a ruler of an area that covers roughly 1/3 of southern England, and personally going out and killing eldritch horror fairy monsters which Amarantha has sent to mess with him. Speaking of, Tamlin's power level is quite high, but in fact is diminished by Amarantha's curse, which in turn makes his feats even more powerful in a power scaling sense. Ironically enough, the Akotar wiki does textual power scaling, making it reminiscent of literary greats like the Naruto or Dragon Ball Z wikis. Back to Tamlin. At the end of the novel, when Fyru has to prove her love via trials, he maintains a stoic visage and does nothing while Triple Agent Rhys drugs and sexually humiliates her. Tamlin, of course, does his bit of self-sacrifice for his people and to prevent Amarantha from finding what needles him to torture Feyru more. He even does his best to have his surrogate and emissary help Feyru, invoking Amarantha's wrath. This set of actions forms the origin of the fandom's hatred of him. He didn't act irrationally to try to save her. Even when doing so would have gotten basically everybody killed. By the second book, the entire ordeal forces him to suffer a mental break and lock Feyre in a basement, causing her to defect to the, don't forget, more powerful, more handsome, and more dark and mysterious Rhys, seeds of which are already planted in the final 100 pages of Akotar. This context to me reads as Moss setting up context to justify Feyru dumping a man that did nothing but do his best to protect his people, and Feyru from harm for Rhys, a man that saved her from rape once at a ritual. But in the last 100 pages, sexually humiliates, drugs, extorts, and psychologically tortures her. Tamlin is written to theoretically be her mate, but by the second novel is left as a psychologically broken husk, Feyre having been mated, femgunner for soul-mated, allegedly, to Rhys. I couldn't work this in anywhere else. But by marrying Rhys, Feyru becomes the queen of Illyria. By the end of the series, she rules femgunner Albania. Also, femgunner Albania is Scotland. Thought that was funny. If you doubt me, check the fan wiki. I would implore the reader to consider that this book is not only the gateway drug for romantasy, porn. I would also point out to the reader that in the hentai, anime porn community, the open secret is that NTR, cheating, and rape content possesses an outsized female fan base. Akotar exists as an altar to the red-pilled gods of hypergamy and rape fantasy, only when it's Chad. Often in manosphere circles, that one study about women's rape fantasies is cited, and feminists will respond with criticism on sample size, etc., and so forth. I grant that the study is flawed, but on a different basis. It relied on self-reporting, which creates a selection bias. As we all know, revealed preference remains king, queen, fairy lord, vizier, and master of all sociological analysis. Everyone moves to the least black neighborhood they can in the USA, even in 2025, after all. You want to know how many women will indulge their rape fantasies? Take the under 30 women you know and ask them about several key words: fairy books, fairy schmut, book talk, a court of thorns and roses, fourth wing, and so on. They don't perceive of it as porn, so they'll out themselves. If anyone believes this book doesn't consist of a series of rape fantasies, they're lying, retarded, illiterate, delusional, or next-level retarded. In my experience, it's something like 38 out of 40, roughly. That is to say, there's a higher proportion of women outing themselves as rape enjoyers than men who would admit they really like big tits in mixed company. Imagine a world where Monster Musume, High School DxD, etc. were put on prime time, and people had the temerity to suggest that not all men love giant tits and toned bodies. Which is to say that the real crazy thing here remains that women will just admit and discuss their pornographic tastes in public. I'm going to assume 99% of my readership is male by this point, which is probably true. Have you ever talked with the boys or in public about your porno preferences? I'm not talking about the tits versus ass debate, which perennially happens, but rather specific analysis of characters and scenes from porno. Have you ever suggested to random women that they consume your preferred porno? Have you ever talked about porno to a complete stranger? No. Well, it's safe to say you have a Y chromosome, because I only know this book exists because someone mentioned it to me at a work event, on the clock. I've been recommended it by women. These women also believe it will help men understand women better. When I bought my hardcover copy, which I may destroy via Tannerite, the cashier didn't even think it was odd, which to me indicates there's enough simps buying this slop because of girlfriends, that it isn't even surprising to see a guy buy it. It's a mainstream novel. I purchased my copy barely 10 paces from the entrance to the bookstore. Sure, the TV deal on Akotar fell through with Disney, but Moss assures us she's looking for a new deal in mid-2025. To avoid aging this, I'll put in an aside. I think this will be made into a TV show, and I hope the femme-gooners have to intersect with the anti-woke people over race swaps, given everyone in this novel is white. While nonfiction retains its lead over fiction by a 3.2 ratio, 80% of all fiction novels are marketed and sold to women, and it's clear that this slop constitutes a major reason why. It is worth considering that genre crypsis and obfuscation are occurring here. Young adult, romance, book talk, and sci-fi fantasy basically exist on the same continuum and, just like regular porn, the less explicit, spicy stuff feeds into the harder stuff. Akotar might not feature explicit actual rape and BDSM, but the stuff that these women end up reading 8 months after probably will. This points to the most frustrating aspect of discussion surrounding Akotar and its genre sibling titles. There exists a rhetorical shell game that's played any time this comes up. It's never called porn. It's smut, spicy literature, and it's not the same. It's reading. They're all euphemisms to soften the blow that they're reading 416 pages of rape-adjacent sexual domination fantasy with baked-in masturbatory hypergamy, monkey branching, and sexual competition over women, where men are described as gorgeous and sensuous. We somehow managed to re-engineer "I read it for the articles," but worse. And for women, Playboy, as far as I'm aware, was never really rape-adjacent. It's not the same. Its reading reveals a lot of willful ignorance and blatant lying. For one, men absolutely read and write porn. 4chan's traditional games board had a weekend smut thread before the Troons destroyed it. And you bet your ass the market for Warhammer 40k smut authors and readers is majority male. Less male than 40k players, but only marginally. I'm not saying this to lionize, valorize, or defend male porn consumption or creation. Just noting that it is absolutely within the conceptual horizons for a man to consider written material titillating. It is the same, and arguably worse, as most guys start with relatively tame shit compared to what I read in Chapter 21 of Akotar, and the characters in that hadn't even engaged in sexual congress yet. The fuzzy conceptual shell games give the consumer of this media the illusion that it's not what it is, which in turn erases the taboo around it. I would not have written this article had I not first learned of these books from a co-worker at a work social event. She said she was into reading such that she reneged on a social engagement to read a book. And given her level of attractiveness, I figured I'd continue the conversation. Especially given that I, too, have done that. I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading 85 Days in Slavyansk. Well, after a tad bit of prodding, my female co-worker admitted to reneging to read the sequel to Akotar. Keep in mind, dear reader, that this is the book where Fairy dumps Tamlin to be with Reese. I would point out that, of the females I work with, this one was the most attractive. So the premise that these books somehow exist as cope for uggos absolutely does not test muster. You can use the keywords I mentioned earlier, and you'll get Zoomer women to tell on themselves. It's a near universal phenomenon. Given the permeation of this material, one must consider the social implications. If Tamlin gets viewed as a bad boyfriend, what chance do you, a non-perfect, not immortal, not princely, not fairy, and not mind-reading dude have? Before you accuse me of sexual insecurity, consider the reverse. Is a woman not unreasonable for taking umbrage with her husband's porn addiction? A lot of hay is made in right-wing circles freaking out over porn. But I'll be honest, you have to get pretty deep before you start finding shit that's as rape-adjacent as Akotar. Men are pretty self-accountable on this too. NoFap was invented by men, and most men recognize porn addiction as a serious problem to be addressed. Society has turned a blind eye here and actively discourages discussion of this topic. The average age a man is exposed to porn is now 12 years old. The average age a girl discovers this slop is 13. Damn near the same. The Akotar boom started in 2023, but it's not limited to certain age bands. A girl born in 2010 is going to get hit just as hard as one born in 2000. I'd like to comment more on the implications this has for behavior, but very few people study this at any level. So I'll point to several things. Firstly, women are never going to escape the rape fantasy and violence fantasy allegations. I'm convinced it's lizard-brained. To be entirely honest, this book and its popularity has led me to believe that women do not honestly feel anything close to what men understand love to be. Secondly, I feel this will set an entitlement spiral that will cause women to constantly raise expectations to such ridiculous degrees that society will have to hurt on a massive level as a result. Thirdly, I regret that civilization exists such that it can promulgate these works. I sincerely hope and pray that God blesses us with the circumstance necessary for a Chud crusade, cleansing the earth and leaving behind a tiny population of humans to repopulate the wasteland. If I am killed in this effort, I am fine. I would rather join my Creator than live in a world where any random woman I come across is subconsciously comparing me to her pretend rapist fairy boyfriend. I would like to thank Ethanol, Yuki Kajura, Duran Duran, Insomnilant, and 2 of my co-workers for helping me with this review and helping me get through it. If this article does well enough for the American Sun to pay me for a sequel, I'll suffer through Fourth Wing. God can't come back soon enough. Expect a follow-up documenting my destruction of this accursed tome. A quote says, "Men, we have been outgooned." From ex-user and artist at Rommel Produce, reacting to gacha games targeted towards women. A quote says, "And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them." From Paul's Epistle to the Romans, chapter 1, verses 28 to 32. That concludes Sarah J. Maas Ruined a Generation of Women, an article from March 3, 2025, in the publication The American Sun.